The coffee cup shattered against the marble floor, sending ceramic shards skittering across the pristine tiles of the Meridian Hotel's restaurant. Elena Vasquez froze, her serving tray trembling in her hands as the amber liquid spread like spilled blood beneath the polished leather shoes of the man who had just entered the dining room. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. He was tall, angular with silver-streaked hair combed back in precise lines. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, but it was his eyes that made Elena's breath catch in her throat, pale gray eyes that seemed to catalog every face, every detail, every potential threat in the room. She knew those eyes. She had seen them in classified briefings, in surveillance photos, in the nightmares that had haunted her sleep for 3 years. Viktor Kozlov, the ghost of Belgrade, the architect of 17 bombings across 3 continents, the man responsible for the death of her partner, Agent Sarah Chun, in that hotel explosion in Prague. Elena forced her hands to steady as she knelt to collect the broken ceramic, her dark hair falling forward to shield her face. 3 months of careful preparation, 3 months of building her cover as Elena Martinez, a struggling single mother working double shifts to pay for her daughter's medical bills. 3 months of perfecting her accent, her mannerisms, her story. It couldn't end now, not when Kozlov was finally within reach. "Pardon, Center," she murmured in heavily accented English, keeping her eyes down as she swept the fragments into her apron. "I am so clumsy today." But Kozlov wasn't moving. His expensive Italian shoes remained planted on the marble, and Elena could feel his gaze boring into the top of her head like a physical weight. Around them, the lunch crowd continued their conversations, oil executives discussing pipeline deals, diplomats negotiating trade agreements, wealthy tourists planning their next exotic destination. The Meridian Hotel catered to the global elite, which was exactly why Kozlov had chosen it for his meeting with the arms dealer known only as the chemist. Elena's earpiece crackled almost imperceptibly, the sound masked by the gentle classical music floating through the restaurant speakers. Marcus Webb's voice was barely a whisper. "Phoenix, you're burning time. Target just made contact with secondary asset at table 7. We need those photos." She stood slowly, her movements deliberately servile, apologetic. Through her peripheral vision, she could see the chemist, a thin, nervous man with wire-rimmed glasses, already seated at the corner table, a black briefcase handcuffed to his wrist. The case that contained the chemical weapons formulas stolen from the CDC. The case that could kill millions if it fell into the wrong hands. "Center," Elena said again, finally raising her eyes to Kozlov's face. "Can I bring you something? Coffee? Perhaps a table?" For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, Kozlov studied her face. Elena kept her expression carefully blank, the picture of weary resignation. She was Latina now, not the blonde, blue-eyed CIA operative whose photo had once graced wanted posters across Eastern Europe. 3 years of deep cover work had taught her to become invisible, to blend into the background until she was nothing more than another faceless service worker. "Table 7, Kozlov said finally, his English tinged with a slight Russian accent. "My colleague is waiting." Elena nodded and led him across the dining room, her sensible shoes silent on the marble. The Meridian's restaurant was a study in understated luxury crystal chandeliers, casting warm light over cream-colored walls, fresh orchids adorning each table, the gentle murmur of wealth and power conducting business over expensive wine. It was the kind of place where deals worth billions were sealed with handshakes, where the fate of nations could be decided over dessert. As they approached table 7, Elena's training kicked in. She catalogued exits, the main entrance, the service door leading to the kitchen, the French doors opening onto the hotel's garden terrace. She noted the placement of other diners, identifying potential civilians who might be caught in crossfire. Most importantly, She positioned herself to overhear the conversation while maintaining her cover. The chemist looked up nervously as Kozlov slid into the seat across from him. Dr. Harrison Blake, according to his file, a brilliant biochemist, whose gambling debts had made him desperate enough to steal classified formulas. His hands shook as he lifted his water glass, ice cubes clinking against the crystal. "Gentlemen," Elena said, producing her order pad with practiced ease, "what can I start you with today?" Kozlov ordered in rapid-fire Russian, testing her, but Elena had anticipated this. She smiled apologetically and shook her head. "I'm sorry, Senator. Only English and Spanish. I can ask Miguel in the kitchen if you prefer. English is fine." Kozlov cut her off, his pale eyes never leaving her face. "2 glasses of your best vodka. Premium and privacy." Elena nodded and retreated to the service station, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the small camera hidden in her name tag, she knew Marcus and the rest of the team were watching from their surveillance van parked outside. Agent Torres was positioned as a businessman at table 3. Agent Kim posed as a hotel guest reading a newspaper by the windows. They were all waiting for her signal, waiting for her to get close enough to photograph the contents of that briefcase. She returned with the vodka, noting how Blake's nervous energy had infected his breathing short, shallow gasps that made the collar of his white shirt damp with perspiration. Kozlov, by contrast, was a study in controlled stillness, his movements economical and precise as he lifted his glass. "To profitable partnerships," Kozlov said, and Blake echoed the toast. With a shaking hand, Elena lingered nearby, refilling water glasses at adjacent tables, straining to catch fragments of their conversation. The men spoke in careful euphemisms: product shipment, quality assurance, delivery timeline, but she could read between the lines. The chemical weapons would be moved within 48 hours. The target remained classified, but Kozlov's involvement suggested something spectacular, something that would make headlines around the world. It was then, as she bent to clear breadcrumbs from a nearby table, that she heard Kozlov's voice change. The temperature in his tone dropped by several degrees, becoming sharp, focused. "You know," he said conversationally to Blake, "I have an excellent memory for faces. It saved my life on numerous occasions." Elena's blood turned to ice water in her veins, but she continued her work, moving with the same measured pace as before. "Don't run. Don't look up. Don't give him any reason to." "There was a woman," Kozlov continued, his voice carrying easily across the space between tables. "CIA operative, caused me considerable ... inconvenience a few years ago in Praga. Blonde hair, blue eyes. They called her Phoenix, I believe, because she kept rising from the ashes of my operations." Blake made a nervous sound that might have been agreement, but Elena could tell he wasn't really listening. His attention was focused on the briefcase, on the millions of dollars it represented, on the escape from debt it promised, but Kozlov's attention was elsewhere. Elena felt his gaze like a physical touch as she moved between tables, and she knew, with sickening certainty, that her cover was compromised. 3 months of careful work, 3 months of building relationships with staff and customers, 3 months of becoming invisible, all of it crumbling because of her own ambition to get close to the man who had killed her partner. Her earpiece crackled again. Marcus's voice was tight with concern. "Phoenix, we're reading elevated stress indicators. Report status." Elena couldn't respond, not with Kozlov watching her every move. Instead, she continued her performance, taking orders from nearby tables, refilling coffee cups, playing the role of Elena Martinez even as her real identity hung in the balance. The Meridian Hotel had a history that stretched back 80 years. Built during an era when elegance was measured in marble thickness and crystal clarity. Its walls had witnessed decades of international intrigue, Cold War negotiations, corporate espionage, the quiet deals that shaped global politics. The building itself seemed to hold its breath as Elena moved through its dining room, carrying the weight of her mission and the growing certainty that she had been recognized. At table 7, Blake was finally opening the briefcase with shaking hands, the metallic clicks of the locks echoing like gunshots in Elena's enhanced hearing. Inside, she glimpsed neat rows of computer drives and documentation, the complete chemical weapons formulas that could turn ordinary materials into instruments of mass destruction. This was her moment. The photos she needed were right there, 20 feet away. All she had to do was get close enough for the camera to capture clear images. But Kozlov's attention remained fixed on her with laser-like intensity, and she knew that one wrong move would expose not just her mission, but the entire operation. She approached their table with coffee refills, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The silver coffee pot caught the light from the chandeliers above, its polished surface reflecting her face in miniature, the face that had once been plastered on wanted posters from Moscow to Marseille. "Refill, gentlemen?" she asked, her accent perfectly maintained even as her pulse thundered in her ears. Blake nodded absently, his attention absorbed by the contents of the briefcase. But Kozlov leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with the patience of a predator that had cornered its prey. "Tell me," he said quietly, "do you have children, miss?" "Martinez," Elena replied without hesitation. "Elena Martinez." "And yes, Senator. My daughter, she is 8 years old, very sick. The medical bills, they are why I work so many hours." It was a good cover story, backed by months of careful documentation. There really was an Elena Martinez, a woman whose identity Elena had borrowed with the woman's unknowing consent. The real Elena was in witness protection, hiding from an abusive ex-husband, while CIA Elena lived her life and worked her job. 8 years old, Kozlov mused, his pale eyes never leaving her face. The same age as my daughter was when she died. In Prague, collateral damage from an operation that went badly wrong. Elena's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. She remembered Prague, the intelligence that had led her team to that hotel, the explosion that had killed Sarah and 17 innocent civilians. She also remembered the reports that claimed Kozlov's family had been evacuated hours before the blast, that no children had been harmed in the operation. "I am sorry for your loss, Senator," she said carefully. "Children should never suffer for the choices of adults." Something flickered in Kozlov's eyes, amusement, perhaps, or recognition. "Indeed," he said softly. "They should not." Blake was growing impatient, glancing repeatedly at his watch and the briefcase. Around them, the lunch crowd continued their meals, oblivious to the deadly game being played out at table 7. Elena needed to get those photographs, but Kozlov's scrutiny was making it impossible to maneuver her camera into position. Her earpiece crackled once more. Marcus's voice urgent. "Phoenix, abort. Repeat, abort mission. We're seeing too much heat on your position." But Elena couldn't abort. Not when the chemical weapons were right there in front of her. Not when thousands of innocent lives hung in the balance. Not when she finally had a chance to bring down the man who had haunted her dreams for 3 years. She began to pour coffee into Blake's cup, the rich brown liquid steaming in the cool, air-conditioned atmosphere. As she leaned forward, her name-tag camera had a clear view of the briefcase contents. Just a few more seconds, just enough time for the high-resolution lens to capture the critical documents. "Phoenix," Kozlov said quietly, and the name fell into the dining room like a stone into still water. Elena's hand never wavered as she finished pouring the coffee, but inside, her world collapsed into crystalline fragments. The cover that had taken months to build, the identity that had become as real as her own, the safety that had allowed her to get this close to her target, all of it shattered in that single moment of recognition. Blake looked up sharply, his eyes darting between Elena and Kozlov with growing alarm. "What's going on?" he whispered. "Who is Phoenix?" Elena straightened slowly, the coffee pot still in her hand, and for the first time in 3 years, She looked Viktor Kozlov directly in the eye without pretense or disguise. In that gaze, she saw acknowledgement, respect, and something that might have been regret. "Hello, Viktor," she said quietly, dropping the accent that had become second nature. "It's been a long time." The restaurant around them continued its quiet hum of conversation and clinking silverware. But at table 7, 3 people sat suspended in a moment that would change everything. The briefcase remained open between them, its deadly contents glinting in the afternoon light streaming through the French doors. Somewhere beyond the garden terrace, Marcus and the rest of her team were probably already mobilizing, preparing for the worst-case scenario they had all hoped to avoid. But Elena wasn't thinking about extraction protocols or backup plans. She was thinking about Sarah Chun, her partner and closest friend, who had died in a fireball of twisted metal and shattered glass. She was thinking about the 17 innocent people who had been in that Prague hotel, people whose only crime had been staying in the wrong place at the wrong time. And she was thinking about the millions more who would die if the contents of Blake's briefcase found their way into the wrong hands. The coffee pot grew heavy in her grip, and she realized that her carefully constructed world of covers and lies and stolen identities had just collapsed around her. But as she looked at Kozlov's face, seeing neither triumph nor anger, but something closer to weary resignation, she understood that this moment had been inevitable from the very beginning. Ghost of Belgrade had finally cornered the Phoenix. Now they would see who burned first. Elena had been Elena Martinez for 93 days. And in that time, she had learned things about loneliness that her CIA training had never prepared her for. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., she would waken her studio apartment 6 blocks from the Meridian Hotel, surrounded by the carefully curated life of a woman who existed only on paper. The apartment was small, cramped, filled with the kind of discount furniture and second-hand appliances that spoke of financial struggle and broken dreams. The walls were covered with photographs, images of a young girl with dark hair and serious eyes, supposedly Elena's daughter Sofia. The real Sofia Martinez was safe in witness protection with her mother, but CIA Elena had memorized every detail of the child's life. Her favorite color was purple. She loved dinosaurs and hated broccoli. She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up, or maybe an astronaut, depending on the day of the week. Elena would stare at those photos while drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug, practicing conversations she would never have with a child she would never know. "Mia, you need to eat your vegetables." "No, Sofia, we cannot afford the expensive shoes." "Your medicines are more important than Mama's dreams." The fabricated maternal love felt like a physical ache in her chest, a hollow space where real emotions should have lived. She had learned to inhabit this loneliness so completely that sometimes she forgot which feelings belonged to Elena Martinez and which belonged to the operative known as Phoenix. Her daily routine was choreographed with military precision. After coffee, she would dress in the same 3 uniforms she rotated through cheap polyester blends that wrinkled easily and smelled like industrial detergent. The black pants were always slightly too tight, the white blouses always slightly too loose, because Elena Martinez couldn't afford clothes that fit properly. Every morning, she would stand in front of the cracked mirror in her tiny bathroom and practice her expressions: weary resignation, grateful humility, the particular smile of someone who had learned not to expect too much from life. The walk to work took 22 minutes through neighborhoods that grew progressively wealthier with each block. Elena would pass the bodega where she bought her groceries, the laundromat where she spent Sunday afternoons surrounded by the chatter of other working mothers, the playground where she sometimes sat on benches and watched children play, crafting stories about Sofia's imaginary adventures. At the Meridian Hotel, she would clock in at exactly 6:45 a.m. and begin the transformation that had become second nature. Elena Martinez was invisible in the way that service workers often were, noticed only when something went wrong, appreciated only in her absence. She moved through the hotel's opulent spaces like a ghost, cleaning up the messes of people who would never know her name. Her supervisor, Mrs. Chu, no relation to her dead partner, but the coincidence had felt like a cruel joke from the universe, was a stern Taiwanese woman who treated the restaurant staff like wayward children, Elena. She would say in her precise English, "Table 6 needs water. Table 12 wants extra bread. And please, try to smile more." The guests notice when service staff look unhappy. So Elena learned to smile. She learned to make her exhaustion look grateful, her poverty look dignified, her isolation look like contentment. She developed relationships with the other workers, Carmen, from housekeeping, who shared gossip and rapid-fire Spanish. Miguel from the kitchen, who always saved her the best leftovers. Rosa from the front desk, who had 3 kids and chronic back pain and dreams of opening her own business someday. These people became her anchors to Elena Martinez's reality. Carmen would show her pictures of her grandson's first communion. Miguel would complain about his landlord and ask for advice about his immigration paperwork. Rosa would invite her to family barbecues that Elena always politely declined, claiming she needed to work double shifts to pay for Sophia's medical expenses. The lies came so easily that Elena sometimes wondered if this was who she had always been, a woman skilled at loving people just enough to gain their trust, but never enough to let them see who she really was underneath. In the evenings, after her shifts at the Meridian, Elena would take a second job cleaning office buildings downtown. This was part of her cover, the struggling single mother working multiple jobs, but it also served a strategic purpose. The late-night cleaning work gave her access to buildings throughout the city, allowed her to move through spaces unobserved, provided cover for surveillance and intelligence gathering. She would push her cart of cleaning supplies through darkened hallways, listening to conversations through thin office walls, photographing documents left carelessly on desks, planting surveillance devices in meeting rooms where arms dealers and their clients conducted business. The real Elena Martinez would never have had the skills or clearance for such work, but CIA Elena had been doing variations of this job for 15 years. The contradictions of her double life created a kind of cognitive dissonance that she had learned to navigate like a familiar maze. She would clean the offices of the very people she was investigating, emptying their trash cans and vacuuming their floors while memorizing the contents of their private conversations. She had become an expert at being overlooked, at existing in the peripheral vision of powerful people who never considered that their cleaning lady might be listening, learning, reporting back to handlers who treated her like a valuable but expendable asset. Marcus Webb checked in with her twice weekly through encrypted communications that looked like text messages from Sophia's doctor. Sophia's test results came back normal, meant the mission was proceeding as planned. Sophia's fever has broken, meant she had successfully gathered intelligence. Sophia needs to stay home from school, meant abort immediately and prepare for extraction. But Elena had never needed extraction. She had learned to love the work in ways that probably weren't healthy for an undercover operative. There was something seductive about the completeness of her disguise, the way she could disappear so thoroughly into another person's life that even she sometimes forgot where Elena Martinez ended and Phoenix began. During her off hours, she would sit in her small apartment and write letters to Sophia that would never be sent. She would describe her days at the hotel, her conversations with the other staff members, her dreams of saving enough money to take Sophia to Disneyland someday. The letters were part of maintaining her cover, but they had evolved into something more personal, a way of processing the isolation that came with living someone else's life so completely. "Dear Mia," she would write in careful Spanish, "today I served coffee to a man who reminded me of your grandfather, the one you never met because he died before you were born. He had the same kind eyes, the same way of speaking quietly, but with authority. I imagined what it would be like if you could meet him. If you could have grandparents who spoiled you and told you stories about the old country. But then I remembered that our family is just us, just you and Mama, and that has to be enough. The fictional relationship with Sofia had become the most real thing in Elena's constructed life. She found herself genuinely worried about the child's imaginary medical bills, genuinely proud of her imaginary achievements in school, genuinely heartbroken by the thought that they were separated by circumstances beyond their control. The love she felt for this invented daughter was perhaps the only honest emotion she was allowed to experience in her current identity. At the Meridian Hotel, Elena had cultivated relationships with regular customers, businessmen who asked for the same table every week, politicians who preferred their coffee black and their conversations private, wealthy tourists who tipped well and treated service staff with casual indifference. She learned their habits, their preferences, their secrets. She became part of the invisible infrastructure that supported their comfortable lives. There was Senator Richards, who met with defense contractors every third Tuesday and always ordered the salmon. There was Mrs. Petrov, the oil executive's wife, who drank vodka martinis at lunch and spoke too loudly on her phone about her husband's business dealings in Kazakhstan. There was Dr. Yates, the retired military contractor, who came in alone every Friday and left photographs of his granddaughter on the table. When he thought no one was looking, Elena learned to read these people's stories in the small details. The tremor in Senator Richards' hands that suggested stress or medication. The way Mrs. Petrov's designer handbag always contained prescription bottles she tried to hide. The loneliness in Dr. Yates' eyes that spoke of secrets that had cost him his family's trust. She became skilled at the particular kind of invisibility that service workers mastered. Present enough to anticipate needs, absent enough to preserve the illusion of privacy. Customers would discuss classified contracts and illegal arms deals in front of her, as if she were a piece of furniture, never imagining that their waitress understood the implications of their conversations, or had the training to act on the intelligence they carelessly revealed. The work was exhausting in ways that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. Every conversation required constant calculation, how much interest to show, how much understanding to reveal, how to encourage confidences without appearing too curious. Elena had to be friendly but not memorable, helpful but not intrusive, present but not threatening. Some evenings, after particularly difficult shifts, she would return to her apartment and find herself unable to remember which thoughts belonged to Elena Martinez and which belonged to Phoenix. The boundaries between her real personality and her constructed identity had blurred until she wasn't sure there was a meaningful distinction anymore. She would stand in her shower, washing off the day's accumulation of coffee smells and kitchen grease, and try to remember who she had been before she became Elena Martinez. But the memories felt distant, faded, like photographs left too long in sunlight. She could recall facts about her previous life, her training at Langley, her partnership with Sarah Chun, the operations in Prague and Belgrade and Moscow, but the emotions attached to those memories felt muted, as if they belonged to someone else. The most honest moments came late at night, when she couldn't sleep and would find herself writing in the journal she kept hidden beneath her mattress. Not the fake diary of Elena Martinez, but her real thoughts, her real fears, her real dreams. These pages were written in a code of her own invention, mixing languages and symbols in ways that would be meaningless to anyone else. "I dreamed about Sarah again," she would write. "We were back in Prague, but this time I was fast enough to warn her about the bomb. This time we both made it out. She told me jokes while we waited for extraction, and I remembered what it felt like to laugh without calculating the effect it would have on my cover identity. The grief she carried for her dead partner was perhaps the only emotion that felt entirely her own, uncontaminated by the requirements of her mission or the expectations of her fabricated life. Sarah had been the one person who knew Phoenix completely, her strengths and weaknesses, her fears and ambitions, her capacity for both ruthlessness and surprising tenderness. Elena would sometimes catch herself having conversations with Sarah in her head, explaining the moral compromises and emotional costs of deep cover work. "I'm losing myself," she would whisper to the photograph she kept hidden in her jewelry box, the only image she had of her real life, her real friendships, her real identity. "I'm becoming someone else so completely that I don't know how to find my way back." But the work continued, day after day, shift after shift. Elena Martinez served coffee and cleared tables and smiled at customers who would never know her name. She sent money to pay for Sophia's medical bills, money that was actually deposited into accounts controlled by the CI's administrative division. She wrote letters to a daughter who didn't exist and worried about problems that were carefully constructed fiction. And through it all, she watched and listened and gathered intelligence that would eventually lead her to Viktor Kozlov and the briefcase full of chemical weapons formulas and the moment when her carefully constructed world would finally collapse around her. The morning of that final day had started like all the others. Elena woke at 5:30 a.m., drank instant coffee from her chipped mug, practiced conversations with Sophia's photograph, and walked 22 minutes to the Meridian Hotel through neighborhoods that marked the geography of her false life. She clocked in at exactly 6:45 a.m., tied on her apron, and began the performance that had become indistinguishable from reality. She had no way of knowing that by afternoon, Elena Martinez would cease to exist, that Phoenix would rise from the ashes of her carefully constructed identity, and that 3 years of deep cover work would culminate in a moment of recognition that would change everything. But perhaps some part of her had always known this day would come. Perhaps that was why she had thrown herself so completely into the role of Elena Martinez, not just as a cover identity, but as a kind of refuge from the weight of being Phoenix. For 3 months, she had been allowed to be someone ordinary, someone whose problems were simple and whose dreams were modest, and whose love for her imaginary daughter was the most honest emotion she had felt in years. Now, as she faced Viktor Kozlov across the marble floor of the Meridian Hotel's restaurant, Elena realized that she was about to lose the only identity that had ever felt like home. The silence at table 7 stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Blake's nervous energy had transformed into something approaching panic as he looked between Elena and Kozlov, his hands fluttering over the open briefcase like a pianist who had forgotten his music. Around them, the Meridian Hotel's restaurant continued its afternoon rhythm, the gentle clink of silverware on china, the murmur of business conversations, the soft jazz emanating from hidden speakers. But Elena felt as if she were trapped inside a bubble of crystalline silence. "Close it," Kozlov said quietly to Blake, nodding toward the briefcase. His pale eyes never left Elena's face. "Our business can wait." Blake's fingers fumbled with the latches, his breathing shallow and rapid. "I don't understand. Who is she? What's happening?" "Dr. Blake," Elena said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "You should leave. Now. Walk out through the main entrance and don't look back." But Kozlov raised a hand, a gesture so small it might have been him reaching for his water glass, and Blake froze as if struck. "I'm afraid Dr. Blake won't be going anywhere just yet," Kozlov said. "You see, Phoenix, he and I have unfinished business. And now it seems so do we." Elena's earpiece crackled with Marcus's voice, urgent and concerned. "Phoenix, we have movement. Around the perimeter. Unknown hostiles taking positions. Request immediate status report." She couldn't respond, not with Kozlov watching her so intently. Instead, she slowly set the coffee pot down on a nearby service station and turned to face him fully. The movement revealed the slight bulge of the service weapon concealed beneath her uniform, a detail that Kozlov's trained eyes undoubtedly cataloged immediately. 3 years, Kozlov mused, leaning back in his chair with the casual confidence of a man who had faced death so many times it no longer held any terror for him. 3 years since Prague. "I must admit, I'm impressed by your commitment to the role," Elena Martinez, wasn't it? The struggling single mother with the sick daughter and the multiple jobs. Sofia is real to me, Elena replied, surprising herself. With the honesty in her voice. Maybe more real than anything else I've been in a long time. Something flickered in Kozlov's eyes. Was it respect? Understanding? Yes, he said softly. I imagined she would be. The lies we tell ourselves are often more comforting than the truth we're running from. Blake made a choking sound, his face pale and slick with perspiration. Are you people insane? This is a public place. There are witnesses everywhere. If you think you can just, Dr. Blake, Kozlov interrupted without looking away from Elena. You've been selling chemical weapons formulas to the highest bidder. I hardly think you're in a position to lecture anyone about propriety. Elena felt the weight of decision pressing down on her like a physical force. Her mission parameters were clear. Photograph the contents of the briefcase. Identify the delivery. Method and timeline. Extract safely without compromising her cover. But her cover was already blown. The briefcase was closed. And Kozlov's people were apparently moving into position around the hotel. Through the French doors leading to the garden terrace, she caught a glimpse of a man in a dark suit adjusting. The collar of his shirt, the universal signal for target acquired in the body language of professional killers. Another man, reading a newspaper by the fountain, had positioned himself with clear sight lines to all the restaurant's exits. Your people work fast, Elena observed. Yours do as well, Kozlov replied. I count at least 3 operatives in the immediate vicinity. The businessman at table 3 has been reading the same page of his newspaper for 20 minutes. The woman by the window checks her watch every 30 seconds, but never appears to be waiting for anyone specific. And there's a van parked outside, with 2 occupants who've been chain-smoking since I arrived. Elena's respect for Kozlov's operational awareness increased despite herself. You could have taken me down the moment you recognized me. Why didn't you? Kozlov was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes studying her face with what might have been melancholy. Because, he said finally, I wanted to understand who you'd become. The phoenix I knew in Prague was all fire and righteousness. Sharp edges and unwavering certainty about who were the heroes and who were the villains. But Elena Martinez. He paused, tilting his head slightly. She's something different, softer, more human. The observation stung because it was accurate. Elena had lost something essential during her months of deep cover, some fundamental core of identity that had once made her confident about her place in the world. She was no longer the unwavering operative who had tracked Kozlov across 3 continents, convinced of her own moral superiority and the righteousness of her cause. People change, she said quietly. Indeed they do. Kozlov lifted his vodka glass and drained it in one smooth motion. The question is whether they change by choice or by necessity. Blake was growing increasingly agitated, his nervous energy approaching the breaking point. Listen, he said, his voice cracking with strain. I just want to complete our transaction and get out of here. I don't care about your personal history or your philosophical discussions. I have what you want. You have what I need. Let's just shut up, Elena and Kozlov said simultaneously, their voices cutting across his panicked rambling with synchronized precision. The moment of unity was absurd and dangerous and somehow perfectly representative of the complex dynamic that had developed between them over years of pursuit and evasion. Elena found herself fighting the urge to smile, which was probably not an appropriate response to being cornered by one of the world's most wanted terrorists. Her earpiece crackled again, Marcus's voice tight with urgency. Phoenix, we have confirmation of hostile forces surrounding the building. 4-person team moving into position in the lobby. Recommend immediate extraction through the kitchen service entrance. Elena's training told her to acknowledge the communication, to begin moving toward the suggested exit route, to prioritize mission survival over any other consideration. But something kept her rooted in place, studying Kozlov's face and trying to understand the game he was playing. "Your handler is getting nervous," Kozlov observed. "I can see it in your eyes. You're receiving instructions, aren't you?" "They want you to run." "Shouldn't I?" Elena asked. "You've blown my cover. Your people are in position. Dr. Blake here has enough chemical weapons formulas to kill half of Europe. From any tactical perspective, I should be extracting immediately. And yet you're still here." "And yet I'm still here," Elena agreed. Blake suddenly lurched to his feet. The briefcase clutched against his chest like a shield. "That's it," he said, his voice high and desperate. "I'm leaving. This is insane. This whole situation is—" He never finished the sentence. The crack of a sniper's rifle echoed across the garden terrace, and Blake's chest exploded in the spray of blood and shattered. Bone. He collapsed backward onto the marble floor, the briefcase skittering away from his lifeless hands, its contents spilling across the cream-colored tiles in a cascade of computer drives and classified documents. Screams erupted throughout the restaurant as customers dove for cover behind overturned tables. Elena's training kicked in automatically. She was moving before her conscious mind had fully processed Blake's death, rolling behind the service station as return fire shattered the French doors in a shower of safety glass. Kozlov hadn't moved. He sat calmly in his chair, seemingly oblivious to the chaos erupting around him, his pale eyes fixed on Elena's position with unwavering focus. "Your people?" Elena called out over the sound of breaking glass and panicked voices. "Not mine," Kozlov replied conversationally. "Yours, I believe. Someone decided Dr. Blake was a liability that needed to be eliminated." Elena's blood ran cold. The implications of Kozlov's words hit her like a physical blow. If her own people had killed Blake, it meant they were willing to eliminate the intelligence source rather than risk it falling into enemy hands. It also meant they considered her cover blown and her mission compromised beyond recovery. Her earpiece had gone silent, which was never a good sign. Either Marcus and the team were maintaining radio discipline during active combat, or they had written her off as unacceptable. Lawson moved on to damage control. Another rifle shot cracked through the air, this one aimed at Kozlov's position. The bullet shattered the crystal water glass in his hand, sending fragments sparkling through the air like deadly confetti, but he still didn't move from his seat. Instead, he brushed glass shards from his sleeve with the same casual attention. "He might give to lint. Interesting," Kozlov murmured. "It appears your superiors have decided that both Dr. Blake and I are expendable. I wonder if they've reached the same conclusion about you." Elena's mind raced through tactical possibilities. The sniper fire was coming from the hotel's north wing, probably the 10th floor based on the angle of impact. Her people would have positioned assets there during the planning phase, which meant the shooter was either Marcus's team following revised orders, or hostile forces who had eliminated her backup and taken their positions. The briefcase lay in the open space between her position and Kozlov's table, its contents scattered across blood-soaked marble. The chemical weapons formulas were right there, the intelligence that 3 months of deep cover work had been designed to capture. But reaching them would mean exposing herself to sniper fire from at least 2 different positions around them. Hotel staff and customers were crawling toward exits, their expensive clothes torn and stained with blood and glass fragments. Elena spotted Rosa from the front desk dragging an injured businessman toward the kitchen entrance, her face streaked with tears and determination. Miguel had armed himself with a large carving knife and was shepherding terrified diners away. From the windows, these people, her people, in the strange way that Elena Martinez's life had become real to her, were caught in the crossfire of an operation they couldn't understand. The weight of their endangered lives settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden. "We need to get the civilians out," Elena said, raising her voice to carry across the chaos. "Do we?" Kozlov replied. "I thought your people had classified them as acceptable collateral damage." Another shot rang out, this one punching through the marble column inches from Elena's head. Stone fragments peppered her face, drawing blood from a dozen tiny cuts. The shooter was definitely tracking her position now, which meant staying behind cover was no longer a viable option. She drew her service weapon, a compact Glock that had been modified to look like the cheap pistol Elena Martinez might have. Bought from a pawn shop and prepared to move. But before she could break cover, Kozlov stood up from his table and walked calmly toward her position, his hands visible and empty. "What are you doing?" Elena hissed as he dropped into cover beside her. "Surviving," Kozlov replied simply. "Your people want me dead, and they're perfectly willing to kill you in the process. My people are probably watching this unfold from a safe distance, prepared to write me off if I don't extract successfully. Which means for the moment we have aligned interests." "You're suggesting we work together?" "I'm suggesting we both want to leave this building alive, and neither of us is likely to accomplish that objective alone." Elena's earpiece suddenly crackled back to life, but the voice wasn't Marcus's. It was Director Harrison, her section chief, speaking with the cold precision of a man making strategic calculations. "Phoenix, this is Control. Your position is compromised and your cover is blown. Dr. Blake has been neutralized to prevent intelligence spillage. Target Kozlov is to be eliminated along with any witnesses who can identify operational methods. You have 30 seconds to extract before we sanitize the entire restaurant." "Sanitize," Elena whispered, horror dawning in her voice. Kozlov nodded grimly. "They're going to kill everyone. Customers, staff, you, me, anyone who might be able to testify about what happened here today. It's the only way to maintain plausible deniability." Elena's world collapsed into crystalline clarity. The people she had served coffee to for 3 months, the co-workers who had become her anchors to humanity, the innocent tourists and business travelers who had simply chosen the wrong restaurant on the wrong day, they were all going to die because her mission had been compromised. "Rosa," she breathed, thinking of the front desk clerk with 3 children and chronic back pain. "Miguel, Carmen, they don't deserve this." "No," Kozlov agreed, "they don't. But your superiors have apparently decided that operational security is more important than civilian lives." Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena closed her eyes for one heartbeat, feeling the last vestiges of Elena Martinez's gentle worldview crumble away. When she opened them again, Phoenix had returned, not the righteous operative who had pursued Kozlov across continents, but something new, something forged by months of living among people whose only crime was trusting her with their friendship. "How many ways out?" she asked. Kozlov smiled, and for the first time, it reached his pale eyes. "Several. But first we need to ensure your friends survive the next few minutes. The kitchen service tunnel connects to the parking garage. If we can get the civilians there before your people begin their sanitization protocol, you're willing to help them, even though they're nothing to you?" "Elena Martinez cares about them," Kozlov said quietly. "And Elena Martinez is part of who you are now, isn't she? The lies we tell ourselves, Phoenix, sometimes they become more true than the truth we started with." Elena nodded, understanding. Passing between them like an electric current. "The briefcase? We'll have to leave it. But I have excellent memory for faces and an even better memory for chemical formulas. Your people may have the drives, but I still have the knowledge they were trying to protect." Another volley of gunfire erupted from multiple positions, this time aimed at the civilians attempting to evacuate. Elena watched in horror as Senator Richards, who always ordered salmon and worried about his grandchildren, fell forward with blood spreading across his expensive suit jacket. "Move," she said, and broke from cover. The next few minutes unfolded like a ballet choreographed in hell. Elena and Kozlov moved through the restaurant in a coordinated dance of violence and protection, using their combined tactical expertise to shield civilians, while engaging hostiles who had taken positions throughout the hotel. Elena put 3 rounds center mass into a sniper positioned in the lobby stairwell, while Kozlov used a stolen assault rifle to provide covering fire for Rosa and Miguel as they shepherded terrified customers toward the kitchen entrance. They moved like partners who had trained together for years, anticipating each other's tactics and covering each other's blind spots with effortless precision. "Kitchen tunnel," Kozlov called out as Elena reloaded behind an overturned table. 2 minutes. "Copy," Elena replied, falling into the military shorthand that felt more natural than the careful Spanish accent she had maintained for months. They fought their way across the restaurant, leaving bodies behind them hostile operatives who had come to eliminate witnesses and found themselves outmatched by 2 of the most skilled killers in the world working in unexpected cooperation. Elena recognized some of the faces mercenaries she had encountered in previous operations, contract killers who worked for whoever paid the highest rate, but some of the shooters wore the tactical gear and moved with the precision of government operatives. Elena's own people, following orders to clean up a compromised mission, regardless of the human cost. In the kitchen, Miguel was helping the last group of civilians into the service tunnel that connected to the parking garage. His eyes widened when he saw Elena, blood-spattered and armed, moving with lethal efficiency that had nothing to do with Elena Martinez's gentle demeanor. "Elena?" he whispered in Spanish. "What is happening? Who are these people?" "I'm sorry." "Miguel," she replied in the same language, her accent now perfect rather than the carefully imperfect version she had maintained for months. "I'm not who you thought I was." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been betrayal or disappointment. But before he could respond, an explosion rocked the building, sending plastered dust cascading from the ceiling and knocking several people to the ground. "They're bringing down the restaurant," Kozlov observed with professional detachment. Controlled demolition disguised as a gas explosion, very thorough. Elena's earpiece crackled one final time, Director Harrison's voice cold and final. "Phoenix, you have been designated a rogue operative. Extraction is no longer an option. Recommend you make peace with whatever God you believe in." She yanked the earpiece from her ear and crushed it under her heel, severing her last connection to the organization that had defined her adult life. Around her, the people she had come to care about as Elena Martinez were looking at her with confusion and growing fear, beginning to understand that the woman they had known was someone else entirely. "Go," she told them, gesturing toward the tunnel. "All of you. Don't stop until you reach the street." Rosa grabbed her arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone with chronic back pain. "Elena, come with us, please." "I can't," Elena replied, her voice gentle despite the chaos around them. "But you need to go. Take care of Miguel and Carmen. Tell them ... She paused, searching for words that could bridge the gap between Elena Martinez and Phoenix. Tell them Elena Martinez loved working with them, even if she was never real. Another explosion shook the building, closer this time. Kozlov was monitoring the tactical situation through the kitchen's windows, his captured rifle ready for immediate use. 30 seconds before structural collapse, he reported. "We need to move." Elena watched the last civilian disappear into the service tunnel, Rosa's tear-streaked face visible for one final moment before the darkness swallowed her. Then she turned to Kozlov, her weapon ready, her decision made. "Where to?" she asked. "Up," Kozlov replied. "They expect us to run. Instead, we're going to make them come to us." They fought their way through collapsing corridors and smoke-filled stairwells, ascending toward the hotel's upper floors, while the building shook itself apart around them. Behind them, Elena could hear the restaurant collapsing in a controlled demolition that would be blamed on faulty gas lines and inadequate Safety inspections. Elena Martinez died in that collapse, buried under tons of marble and crystal, and the carefully constructed lies that had given her 3 months of borrowed humanity. But Phoenix rose from those ashes transformed, no longer the righteous operative who believed in the moral clarity of her mission, but something more complex, more dangerous, and ultimately more human. As they reached the hotel's 20th floor, Kozlov paused at a window overlooking the street below. Emergency vehicles were already arriving, their lights painting the gathering crowd in alternating red and blue. News crews would be there within minutes, ready to report on the tragic accident that had claimed so many innocent lives. Regrets? Kozlov asked quietly. Elena looked down at the people gathering on the sidewalk, searching for familiar faces among the survivors. She spotted Rosa being loaded into an ambulance, Miguel talking rapidly to police officers, Carmen clutching a blanket around her shoulders while staring up at the burning building with stunned comprehension. None, Elena replied, and realized she was telling the truth. The Phoenix who had pursued Viktor Kozlov across 3 continents had been motivated by righteous anger and absolute certainty about good and evil. But the woman standing in this smoke-filled hotel room, watching her former life burn away in the street below, was motivated by something more powerful and more dangerous: love for people who had trusted her, rage at the system that had been willing to sacrifice them, and a bone-deep understanding that sometimes the only way to serve justice was to step outside the law entirely. Then let's go kill the people who ordered this, Kozlov said. And Elena nodded. They disappeared into the smoke and chaos of the burning hotel. 2 of the world's most dangerous individuals united by circumstances neither had anticipated, and bound by a shared understanding that their real war was just beginning. The penthouse suite of the Continental Hotel, 6 blocks from the burning Meridian, served as an unlikely war room. Elena sat cross-legged on expensive Persian carpet, field stripping her weapon with the mechanical precision of someone whose life had depended on such rituals for 15 years. Across from her, Viktor Kozlov manipulated a tablet computer, his pale fingers dancing across encrypted communication networks that most governments couldn't access. They had been silent for 20 minutes, each processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Elena's entire professional identity had been incinerated along with the Meridian's restaurant, while Kozlov's carefully planned arms deal had dissolved into chaos and betrayal. But more than that, both had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the organizations they served and the moral compromises they had been willing to make. "Your director Harrison," Kozlov said finally, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Tell me about him." Elena looked up from her weapon, studying Kozlov's face for signs of deception or manipulation. Finding none, she leaned back against the suite's leather sofa and considered how much truth she was prepared to share with a man she had spent 3 years trying to kill. "Career bureaucrat," she said eventually. "Came up through administrative channels rather than field operations. The kind of man who sees assets and liabilities instead of human beings. He's been section chief for 8 years, and his operational philosophy is pragmatic. Pragmatic enough to murder innocent civilians to protect operational security. Pragmatic enough to justify any action if it serves what he perceives as the greater good." Elena's voice carried a bitterness that surprised her. "I used to admire that about him. The ability to make hard choices without being paralyzed by sentiment or moral squeamishness." Kozlov set down his tablet and fixed her with that unsettling pale stare. "And now? Now I've seen what those hard choices look like when you're on the receiving end." Elena finished reassembling her pistol and chambered a round with a sharp, metallic click. Rosa had 3 children. Miguel was sending money to his mother in El Salvador. Carmen was saving up to bring her sister's family to America. Harrison ordered their deaths without knowing their names, without considering that they were human beings with families and dreams and futures. "Welcome to my world," Kozlov said quietly. Do you know what I was doing in Prague 3 years ago? The operation that you disrupted so effectively? Elena shook her head, though she suspected she wasn't going to like the answer. I was trying to prevent the sale of chemical weapons to a terrorist cell in Morocco. The same chemical weapons that Dr. Blake was selling this afternoon, as it happens. Kozlov's smile was thin and cold. The hotel explosion that killed your partner? That was meant to eliminate the weapons dealers who were planning to use those formulas to poison the water supply in Casablanca. 2 million people would have died. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. You're lying. Am I? Check the classified files from Prague. Look at the passenger manifests from the hotel. The financial records of the men who died in that explosion. You'll find very interesting connections to North African terror networks and chemical weapons procurement. Kozlov leaned forward, his intensity almost hypnotic. Your righteous mission to stop the terrorist Viktor Kozlov actually enabled the very atrocity I was trying to prevent. Elena's hands clenched involuntarily, the weight of his words settling into her consciousness like poison. Sarah died for nothing? Sarah Chun died because your intelligence was faulty and your mission parameters were based on incomplete information. Just like today. Just like every operation where the people giving orders are more concerned with political optics than actual results. Elena stood abruptly, pacing to the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows. Below, she could see smoke still rising from the Meridian Hotel. Emergency lights painting the evening sky in urgent colors. News helicopters circled like mechanical vultures, broadcasting the tragedy to millions of viewers who would never know the real story. Why should I believe you? She asked without turning around. Because you already do, Kozlov replied. Because everything I've told you aligns with the doubts you've been carrying for 3 years. Because Elena Martinez saw more clearly than Phoenix ever did. She understood that the world isn't divided into heroes and villains, just people making choices with incomplete information and hoping for the best. Elena's reflection in the window showed a woman she barely recognized, blood-stained, hollow-eyed, stripped of the comfortable certainties that had sustained her through years of dangerous work. The image reminded her of something Sarah had said during their last conversation. The job changes you. Elena, make sure you're changing into someone you can live with. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Elena glanced at the screen and felt her blood run cold. What is it? Kozlov asked, noting her expression. Intelligence briefing, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hassan al-Rashid's organization just acquired chemical weapons components in Morocco. They're planning something for the water treatment facility in Rabi. Timeline ... 48 hours. Kozlov nodded grimly. The same weapons Blake was selling. The same plot I was trying to prevent in Prague. Your people just enabled a terrorist attack that will kill 2 million civilians because they were more concerned with eliminating me than understanding what I was actually trying to accomplish. Elena sank into the suite's leather armchair, the phone trembling in her hands. The implications were staggering, not just the immediate threat to Moroccan civilians, but the systemic failure of intelligence and decision-making that had led to this moment. There's more, she said, scrolling through the classified briefing. Director Harrison has been in communication with a private military contractor called Meridian Solutions. They're offering to handle the Morocco situation for a fee of $50 million. Plus operational immunity for any collateral damage. Let me guess, Kozlov said with bitter amusement. Meridian Solutions is owned by former CIA and NSA personnel who left government service to pursue more lucrative opportunities in the private sector. Elena checked the corporate records attached to the briefing. Harrison's predecessor, 3 deputy directors, half the operational staff from the European division. She looked up at Kozlov with dawning horror. They're farming out wet work to avoid accountability. If Meridian Solutions kills 2 million people stopping the terrorist attack, It's a tragic but necessary sacrifice. If they fail and 2 million people die in the attack, it's a private contractor's operational failure, not a government policy. Disaster. Perfect deniability, Kozlov agreed. Your tax dollars at work. Elena's phone buzzed again, this time with a direct communication from Director Harrison himself. The message was brief and chilling. Phoenix, your cover identity is now burned and your operational value is compromised. Recommend you consider private sector opportunities. Meridian Solutions is always looking for experienced personnel. Regards. Harrison, son of a bitch, Elena whispered. He's recruiting me for the same organization that's planning to massacre civilians in Morocco. Kozlov moved to his tablet and began pulling up files, financial records, operational reports, intercepted communications that painted a picture of corruption and moral compromise that stretched across multiple intelligence agencies and government departments. Look at this, he said, turning the screen toward Elena. Meridian Solutions has contracts worth over $2 billion for specialized security services in 17 countries. They've been involved in arms deals, regime changes, and what they euphemistically call population management operations from Syria to Somalia. Elena studied the documents, her professional training allowing her to read between the lines of bureaucratic language. These aren't counter-terrorism operations. They're genocide for profit. Indeed. And your Director Harrison has been facilitating their activities for the past 3 years, providing them with intelligence, operational support, and most importantly, legal cover through official channels. The suite's expensive furnishing suddenly felt oppressive, the weight of revelation pressing down on Elena like a physical force. Everything she had believed about her work, her mission, her moral purpose had been systematically dismantled in the space of a single afternoon. The Prague operation, she said quietly. Was Harrison involved in that too? Kozlov nodded. Meridian Solutions was hired to eliminate the chemical weapons dealers, but they wanted the weapons for themselves. Your mission was designed to clear the field of competitors, both the dealers and me, so they could acquire the formulas without interference. And Sarah? Collateral damage. Like the 17 civilians who died in the hotel explosion. Like the hundreds of people who will die when Meridian Solutions deploys those chemical weapons in Morocco. Kozlov's voice carried a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his reputation. Your partner died serving the interests of war profiteers. Phoenix, not America, not democracy, not justice, just money. Elena closed her eyes and felt the last vestiges of her professional identity crumble away. The righteous anger that had sustained her through 3 years of hunting Kozlov, the moral certainty that had justified every compromise and sacrifice, the faith in institutional authority that had made the darker aspects of her work bearable, all of it collapsed into ash and regret. When she opened her eyes again, Viktor Kozlov was watching her with something that might have been sympathy. I know the feeling, he said quietly. The moment when you realize that everything you've been fighting for is a lie. The moment when you understand that the people giving you orders care more about profit margins than human lives. How do you live with it? Elena asked. By choosing a different war, Kozlov replied. By deciding that if the system is irredeemably corrupt, then the only moral choice is to work outside it entirely. Elena's phone buzzed with another message, this one from Marcus Webb. Her former handler's words were carefully coded, but unmistakably clear. Elena, your position has been compromised and your extraction window is closed. Recommend you consider all available options for ensuring your continued operational effectiveness. The Morocco situation requires immediate attention from qualified personnel. Financial compensation for freelance work is competitive. They're all in on it, Elena said, showing Kozlov the message. Every level of the organization. They're trying to recruit me as a mercenary to clean up the mess they created. Kozlov stood and moved to the suite's bar, pouring 2 glasses of expensive whiskey. He handed one to Elena and raised his own in a mock toast. "To the moment of clarity," he said. "When you finally see the world as it really is, rather than as you've been told it should be." Elena accepted the glass but didn't drink. "What happens now? Do we just walk away? Let Morocco burn while we disappear into comfortable exile?" "We could," Kozlov acknowledged. "We're both skilled enough to vanish completely, to build new identities, and live quietly somewhere the past can't find us. It's what any rational person would do. But Elena Martinez wouldn't be able to live with herself if Rosa and Miguel and Carmen died for nothing. And Phoenix, despite everything she's learned about the corruption of her former employers, still believes that some fights are worth having." Elena drained her whiskey in one burning swallow, feeling the alcohol blend with the adrenaline and grief and rage that had been building inside her chest since the moment she recognized Kozlov in the restaurant. "Morocco," she said. "How do we stop Meridian Solutions from killing 2 million people?" Kozlov smiled, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression looked genuinely warm. "We give them a war they didn't expect, fought by rules they don't understand, using methods they never prepared for." He moved to a closet and began pulling out equipment, weapons, communication devices, tactical gear that looked military grade, but bore no identifying marks. Elena recognized the setup immediately. The operational kit of someone who worked outside official channels, accountable to no government and constrained by no law except their own moral code. "You've been planning this for a long time," she observed. 3 years, Kozlov confirmed. "Ever since Praga, I've been tracking Meridian Solutions and building the intelligence necessary to take them down. But I needed someone with inside knowledge of CIA operations, someone with the skills to penetrate their security and the motivation to see the mission through. And you think I'm that someone? Elena Martinez is. She understands the human cost of institutional corruption in ways that Phoenix never could. She's seen what happens when bureaucrats treat people as expendable assets. She knows the difference between serving justice and serving power." Elena moved to the window again, looking down at the emergency lights still flashing around the ruins of the Meridian Hotel. Somewhere in those ruins were the remains of Elena Martinez's carefully constructed life, the relationship she had built, the identity she had inhabited, the simple humanity she had discovered in serving coffee to strangers and worrying about an imaginary daughter's medical bills. But those ruins also contained something else, the bodies of innocent people who had died because her government considered operational security more important than human life. Rosa and Miguel and Carmen had survived, but Senator Richards was dead, along with at least a dozen other civilians whose only crime had been eating lunch in the wrong restaurant. "All right," Elena said, turning back to face Kozlov. "Let's go to war." Kozlov handed her a tactical vest and a combat knife with a matte black finish. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're up against. Meridian Solutions has a 48-hour head start and unlimited resources. They'll be moving the chemical weapons through established smuggling networks, probably using official diplomatic channels to avoid customs inspections." Elena strapped on the vest and felt the familiar weight of professional combat gear settle around her torso. But this time, the sensation was different, not the comfort of institutional support, but the lonely freedom of fighting for principles rather than policies. "How do we track them?" she asked. "The same way I've been tracking them for 3 years, Kozlov replied, showing her a tablet display covered with financial records and communication intercepts. "Money leaves trails no matter how carefully you try to hide it. And Meridian Solutions has been very careless with their bookkeeping." For the next 2 hours they worked side by side, analyzing intelligence and planning an operation that would have been impossible through official channels. Elena found herself impressed by Kozlov's thoroughness. He had built a comprehensive picture of Meridian Solutions operations, from their corporate structure to their operational methods, to the personal vulnerabilities of key personnel. Harrison's weakness is his gambling addiction, Kozlov explained, pulling up financial records that showed massive debts to several offshore casinos. Marcus Webb has a daughter with special needs, and he's been embezzling operational funds to pay for her care. The Meridian Solutions CEO, General Patricia Vance, has been skimming money from contract payments to fund her own private army. "You're talking about blackmail and extortion," Elena observed. "I'm talking about using their own corruption against them. These people have spent years treating human lives as acceptable losses in their pursuit of profit and power. It's time. They learned what it feels like to be expendable assets themselves." Elena studied the intelligence files, her analytical training allowing her to see patterns and connections that painted a comprehensive picture of institutional corruption. But it was Elena Martinez's emotional wisdom that provided the moral framework for what they were planning to do. "We're not just stopping the Morocco operation," she said with growing understanding. "We're taking down the entire network." "All of it," Kozlov confirmed. "Every contract, every operation, every government official who's been enabling their activities. When we're finished, Meridian Solutions will be nothing but a cautionary tale told in intelligence briefings." Elena nodded, feeling something settle into place inside her chest, not the righteous certainty of Phoenix, but something deeper and more sustainable. Elena Martinez's love for Rosa and Miguel and Carmen, combined with Phoenix's operational skills and Viktor Kozlov's 3 years of careful planning. "Then let's get started," she said, and began loading ammunition into spare magazines with the calm efficiency of someone who had finally found a war worth fighting. Outside the suite's windows, the city glittered with 10 million lights each, one representing a life that hung in the balance of decisions made by people who would never face the consequences of their choices. But in the Continental Hotel's penthouse, 2 of the world's most dangerous individuals were preparing to change that equation forever. The revelation phase was complete. Now came the recognition that some injustices could only be answered with violence, and some corruptions could only be cleansed with fire. 3 years later, the cafe in Prague's Old Town Square looked nothing like the Meridian Hotel's restaurant. But Elena found herself serving coffee with the same practiced efficiency she had perfected as Elena Martinez. The morning rush was winding down, and she moved between tables with the invisible grace of someone who had learned to inhabit service work so completely that customers saw only what they expected to see. This time, however, her identity was entirely her own. Elena Reyes owned the small cafe jointly with her business partner, a former Czech intelligence officer named Jan, who asked no questions about her past and offered no explanations for his own. Their customers included local artists, university students, and the occasional tourist who had wandered away from the more famous establishments, closer to the astronomical clock. But Elena's real work happened after hours, when the cafe became a meeting place for people who operated in the spaces between legitimate governments and criminal organizations. Information brokers, freelance operatives, journalists investigating corruption, human rights workers who needed assistance with dangerous extractions. They all found their way to Elena's cafe, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations that spoke of someone who could get things done without questions or complications. The coffee cup she was cleaning slipped from her hands and shattered on the floor, ceramic fragments scattering across the stone tiles with a sound that transported her instantly back to the moment when she had first recognized Viktor Kozlov. But this time, there was no terror, no sense of impending doom, only the mild annoyance of someone who would have to sweep up broken crockery. "Pardon," said a voice from behind her, and Elena's heart stopped. She turned slowly, expecting to see a stranger making a polite observation about her clumsiness. Instead, she found herself facing Rosa Hernandez, older and more confident than the woman Elena had known at the Meridian Hotel, but unmistakably the front desk clerk who had worried about her 3 children and dreamed of becoming a nurse. "Rosa?" Elena whispered, setting down the coffee pot with hands that shook only slightly. Rosa smiled, and Elena saw that she was wearing scrubs beneath her winter coat, the uniform of a working medical professional, rather than the cheap polyester dress of a hotel employee. "Hello, Elena, or should I say, whatever your real name is." Elena felt tears building behind her eyes, an emotional response that surprised her with its intensity. She had thought about Rosa and Miguel and Carmen countless times over the past 3 years, wondering if they were safe, if they were happy, if they remembered Elena Martinez with fondness or bitterness. "Elena is fine," she said quietly. "It's as real a name as any other. How did you find me?" Miguel heard rumors about a woman running a cafe in Prague, someone who helped people who couldn't go to the police for assistance. He said it sounded like something you would do. Rosa's expression grew serious. "We never believed the official story about what happened at the Meridian. FBI agents asking questions, government officials making statements about terrorism and national security. It all felt like lies built on top of other lies." Elena gestured toward a table in the corner, away from the few remaining customers. Rosa followed, her movements careful and deliberate in the way of someone who had learned not to take physical comfort for granted. "You became a nurse, Elena." Observed as they sat down. "Pediatric nursing," Rosa confirmed. "Specializing in children who have been traumatized by violence. The kind of kids who end up in emergency rooms after their parents are killed by drug dealers or their schools are shot up by angry men with guns." She paused, studying Elena's face with professional assessment. "Turns out I have a talent for helping people heal from experiences they can't talk about." Elena poured coffee for both of them from the pot she had carried to their table, her movements automatic and practiced. The ritual gave her time to process the implications of Rosa's presence, not just the fact that she had been found, but the recognition that Rosa had traveled halfway around the world to find her. "Why?" Elena asked simply. "Because we never got to say goodbye properly," Rosa replied. "Because we never got to thank you for saving our lives. Because we never got to tell you that Elena Martinez was real to us, even if she was just a cover identity to you." The words hit Elena like a physical blow, bringing back memories of the woman she had been during those 3 months of deep cover work. Elena Martinez had been constructed from lies and carefully crafted documentation, but the love she had felt for Sophia's photograph, the concern she had shown for her co-workers' problems, the pride she had taken in serving coffee with dignity and grace, those emotions had been as real as anything Elena had ever experienced. "She was real to me too," Elena said quietly. "More real than I expected. More real than was probably safe for someone in my position." Rosa reached across the table and took Elena's hand, her grip warm and surprisingly strong. "Miguel saved enough money to open his restaurant in Los Angeles. He makes the best tamales in the neighborhood, and every Sunday he cooks a special meal for Elena Martinez, a woman who doesn't exist, but who helped him remember what kindness looks like." Elena felt tears running down her cheeks, an emotional release that she hadn't allowed herself in years. The weight of carrying multiple identities, the isolation of living outside legitimate society, the constant awareness that her work required moral compromises that would horrify ordinary people, all of it seemed momentarily bearable because Elena Martinez had been real enough to inspire kindness in people who had every reason to feel betrayed by her deception. "Carmen?" Elena managed to ask. "Her sister's family is doing well. The children are in school, learning English, dreaming American dreams. Carmen works for an immigration lawyer now, helping other families navigate the system that nearly destroyed hers." Rosa's smile was warm but sad. "She says Elena Martinez taught her that sometimes people lie about small things, so they can tell the truth about bigger things." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching Prague's morning light filter through the cafe's windows. Elena found herself remembering specific conversations from her time at the Meridian Hotel. Rosa complaining about her back pain, Miguel worrying about his immigration paperwork, Carmen sharing photographs of her sister's children who were still trapped in El Salvador by poverty and violence. "I need to tell you something," Elena said finally. "About that day, about what really happened." For the next hour, Elena told Rosa the truth. Not the sanitized version that would appear in official reports, but the complete story of corruption and betrayal that had led to the Meridian Hotel's destruction. She explained about Viktor Kozlov and Dr. Blake and the chemical weapons, about Director Harrison's treachery and Meridian Solutions' war profiteering, about the moment when she realized that her own government was willing to murder innocent civilians to protect operational security. Rosa listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. When Elena finished, Rosa was quiet for a long time, processing information that reframed everything she thought she knew about power and authority and institutional loyalty. "So you saved us twice," Rosa said finally. "Once by warning us to evacuate, and once by exposing the people who wanted us dead." "I did what Elena Martinez would have done," Elena replied. "I protected the people I cared about. And now, what do you do now?" Elena gestured around the cafe at the comfortable space she had created for people who operated in moral gray areas. "I help people who can't get help anywhere else. Missing children, human trafficking victims, witnesses who need protection from their own governments. The kind of work that official agencies won't touch because it's too complicated or too dangerous or too morally ambiguous." "You're still Elena Martinez then, just with a different job." Elena considered the observation and realized it was more accurate than she had expected. The woman who had served coffee and worried about an imaginary daughter's medical bills had evolved into someone who served justice and worried about real victim survival. The core motivation remained the same: love for people who deserved protection, rage at systems that treated human beings as expendable assets. "I suppose I am," Elena agreed. Rosa finished her coffee and stood to leave, but she paused at Elena's table for one final exchange. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a small wrapped package. "From all of us. From Miguel and Carmen and the families we've helped. From the children I work with at the hospital. From everyone whose life was touched by Elena Martinez's kindness." Elena unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a silver locket that contained a photograph of Sofia Martinez, not the fictional daughter from Elena's cover identity, but a real 8-year-old girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed smile. "Her name is Sofia Rodriguez," Rosa explained. "Her parents were killed by drug dealers in Juarez, and she was smuggled across the border by relatives who couldn't afford to keep her. She's been living in a group home in Phoenix, waiting for someone who cares enough to help her find a permanent family." Elena stared at the photograph, feeling her heart break and heal simultaneously. The imaginary daughter she had loved from a distance for 3 months had been replaced by a real child who needed the kind of help that Elena Martinez would have provided without hesitation. "The paperwork is complicated," Rosa continued, "because she's undocumented and traumatized, and the official agencies don't know how to handle her case. But someone with your skills and resources might be able to cut through the bureaucracy and find her a family who understands what she's been through." Elena closed the locket and fastened it around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle against her chest like a promise. "What makes you think I'm qualified to help a traumatized child?" "Because Elena Martinez loved Sofia enough to work double shifts for her medical bills, even when Sofia wasn't real. Because you risked your life to save people you had known for only 3 months. Because you understand the difference between serving power and serving justice." Rosa's smile was gentle but determined. "Because some kinds of love are too important to be limited by legal technicalities or official documentation." After Rosa left, Elena sat alone in her cafe, turning the locket between her fingers and thinking about the strange trajectory that had brought her from Phoenix to Elena Martinez, to whatever she was becoming now. The righteous operative who had hunted Viktor Kozlov across 3 continents had believed in institutional authority and moral certainty. The gentle waitress who had served coffee and worried about her imaginary daughter had believed in the simple power of human kindness. But the woman sitting in a Prague cafe, planning to help a real child find a real family, believed in something more complex and more sustainable, the recognition that love could transcend the lies that made it possible, that justice could be served by people who worked outside the law, that sometimes the most important victories were measured in individual lives saved rather than policies changed or organizations destroyed. 5 years later, Sofia Elena Reyes was 13 years old and fluent in 4 languages when she asked her adoptive mother about the locket she always wore. They were sitting in their apartment above the cafe, working on Sofia's mathematics homework, when the girl's curiosity finally overcame her natural discretion. "Mama Elena," she said in the careful English she had perfected over 5 years of American schooling, "that picture in your necklace, is that me when I was little?" Elena looked up from the financial records. She had been reviewing legitimate business documents for the cafe, not the coded intelligence reports that constituted her real work. In the years since Rosa's visit, Elena's life had evolved into something she had never expected. A careful balance between public domesticity and private justice, between the woman who made coffee and helped her daughter with homework, and the operator who specialized in cases that official agencies couldn't handle. "Yes and no, Mia," Elena replied, using the Spanish endearment that had become natural over years of parenting. "That's a picture of the little girl I imagined when I was working undercover, before I knew that someday I would meet a real Sofia who was even more wonderful than anything I could have invented." Sofia considered this information with the serious attention she brought to complex problems. At 13, she was already showing signs of the analytical intelligence that would serve her well in whatever career she eventually chose. But she had also inherited Elena's capacity for emotional wisdom and moral complexity. "So you loved me before you knew me?" "I loved the idea of you," Elena corrected gently. "The hope of you. The possibility that someday I might get to be the kind of person who deserved to take care of someone as special as you turned out to be." Sofia nodded, apparently satisfied with this explanation. At 13, she understood that families could be constructed from love and choice rather than biology and legal documentation. Her adoption had been facilitated through networks that existed outside official channels, arranged by people who understood that bureaucratic obstacles shouldn't prevent traumatized children from finding homes with people who had the skills and resources to help them heal. "Are we going to Prague for summer vacation again?" Sofia asked, returning to her mathematics with the casual acceptance that marked her approach to life's complexities. "If you want to," Elena replied. "Jan has been asking about you. He says the cafe doesn't feel right when you're not there to charm the customers with your terrible Czech pronunciation." Sofia laughed, a sound that never failed to make Elena's chest tight with protective love. The child who had arrived 5 years ago, silent, traumatized, suspicious of adults who claimed to want to help her, had evolved into a confident teenager who understood that home was a choice rather than a location. That family was created through daily acts of care rather than biological connection. Elena's phone buzzed with an encrypted message, the kind of communication that indicated someone needed the kind of help that couldn't be requested through official channels. But instead of checking the message immediately, Elena set the phone aside and focused on Sofia's homework, helping her work through algebraic equations that seemed simple compared to the moral calculations that governed Elena's Section 5. Legacy and Resolution, the Meridian Solutions compound outside Rabi, looked like any other corporate training facility, modern glass buildings surrounded by carefully manicured lawns, security checkpoints staffed by bored-looking guards, the kind of place where pharmaceutical companies might test new drugs or tech firms might conduct employee retreats. But Elena could see the telltale signs of military preparation that marked it as something far more sinister. The spacing of the buildings designed to minimize blast damage, the placement of vehicle barriers disguised as landscape features, the subtle positioning of surveillance, cameras to eliminate blind spots. She crouched in the pre-dawn darkness beside Viktor Kozlov, both of them wearing black tactical gear that had been stripped of any identifying marks. Between them lay the chemical weapons formulas that Dr. Blake had died trying to sell, not the originals, which were now in Meridian Solutions' possession, but perfect forgeries that Kozlov had created using his encyclopedic knowledge of biochemistry and explosives. Phase 1 in 30 seconds, Kozlov whispered into his throat mic, communicating with assets he had positioned around the compound's perimeter. Elena checked her equipment. One final time: plastic explosives, electronic warfare devices, a variety of weapons that ranged from subtle to spectacular. But her most important tool was the thumb drive containing 3 years of financial records, communication intercepts, and operational reports that would expose Meridian Solutions' activities to every major news, organization, and government oversight committee in the world. Their plan was elegant in its simplicity. Infiltrate the compound during the final preparation phase of the Morocco operation. Eliminate key personnel while gathering evidence of their activities, then broadcast the truth to the world while the chemical weapons were neutralized. It was the kind of operation that would have been impossible through official channels, too politically sensitive, too legally complicated, too morally ambiguous for bureaucrats who valued deniability over results. "Remember," Elena murmured, "we're not here to be heroes. We're here to ensure that Rosa and Miguel and Carmen didn't survive for nothing." Kozlov nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. This wasn't about revenge or redemption or any of the emotional motivations that drove characters in action movies. It was about this simple recognition that some injustices could only be answered with direct action, and some corruptions could only be exposed through methods that existed outside legal frameworks. The first explosion lit up the eastern perimeter of the compound, drawing security forces away from the main buildings. Elena and Kozlov moved through the darkness like ghosts, their years of training and experience allowing them to navigate the facility's defensive systems with minimal effort. Inside the main building, they found exactly what Elena had expected: a fully equipped operations center where technicians were finalizing preparations for the Morocco deployment. Wall-mounted screens showed satellite imagery of Rabi's water treatment facility, tactical maps of the surrounding area, and real-time intelligence feeds from assets positioned throughout the city. Elena recognized several faces from her CIA days: analysts and operatives who had left government service for the more lucrative opportunities offered by private military contractors. These weren't ideological extremists or foreign terrorists. They were American professionals who had decided that profit margins were more important than moral principles. "Upload in progress," Kozlov said, connecting the evidence drive to the facility's communication system. 30 seconds. Elena moved through the operations center like a force of nature, her combat skills honed by 15 years of dangerous work. But she wasn't killing indiscriminately. Each target was carefully selected, each elimination designed to cripple the Morocco operation, while gathering additional intelligence about Meridian Solutions' broader activities. Dr. Sarah Vance, the biochemist responsible for weaponizing Blake's formulas, died with a single shot to the head as she tried to destroy critical documentation. Colonel James Murphy, the tactical commander overseeing the Rabi deployment, fell with Elena's knife between his ribs as he reached for the alarm button. Technical Sergeant Maria Santos, the communications specialist coordinating with assets in Morocco, collapsed as Kozlov's suppressed pistol put 3 rounds center mass into her chest. Each death was efficient, professional, necessary. But Elena felt no satisfaction in the killings, only the grim recognition that these people had chosen to participate in an Operation that would murder 2 million civilians for money. Upload complete, Kozlov reported. Financial records, operational. Plans, personnel files, everything is now in the hands of journalists, congressional oversight committees, and international law enforcement agencies. Elena nodded, continuing her methodical destruction of the operations center. Computer drives were removed and destroyed, communication equipment was damaged beyond repair, and critical personnel were eliminated with the same clinical precision. She had once brought to sanctioned CIA operations, but the most important discovery came when they breached the facility's secure storage area. Inside climate-controlled vaults, Elena found not just the chemical weapons components destined for Morocco, but evidence of dozens of other operations, biological weapons sold to Syrian government forces, nuclear materials smuggled to Iranian proxy groups, conventional explosives supplied to terrorist organizations in 3 different continents. Jesus Christ, Elena whispered, staring at inventory records that detailed weapons sales worth billions of dollars. They're not just war profiteers. They're arms dealers supplying both sides of every major conflict in the world. Kozlov moved through the storage area with professional efficiency, photographing documents and cataloging evidence while Elena continued her search. The scope of Meridian Solutions' activities was staggering. They had been selling weapons to everyone from legitimate governments to terrorist cells, playing all sides against each other in pursuit of maximum profit. Look at this, Kozlov said, holding up a tablet displaying communication records. Director Harrison has been providing them with classified intelligence about planned CIA operations. Every time your people were getting close to shutting down an arms smuggling network, Harrison would tip off Meridian Solutions so they could adjust their operations and avoid detection. Elena felt a cold fury building in her chest as she processed the implications. How many operations failed because of his betrayals? How many agents died because he was selling intelligence to war profiteers? 17 confirmed deaths over 3 years, Kozlov replied, consulting the files, including Agent Sarah Chun in Prague. Harrison knew that operation was compromised from the beginning, but he let it proceed because failure would benefit Meridian Solutions' subsequent weapons sales in Eastern Europe. The revelation hit Elena like a physical blow. Sarah hadn't died because of faulty intelligence or operational mistakes. She had been murdered by her own government to protect a private military contractor's profit margins. The grief Elena had carried for 3 years transformed into something harder and more focused, a diamond-bright rage that burned away the last vestiges of institutional loyalty. Time to go, Kozlov announced, setting charges throughout the storage facility. The chemical weapons are neutralized. The evidence is uploaded, and local law enforcement will be here within minutes. But Elena wasn't ready to leave. In the facility's executive offices, she had found something that demanded immediate attention. General Patricia Vance, the CEO of Meridian Solutions, was conducting a video conference with Director Harrison and several other high-ranking government officials. Elena positioned herself outside the conference room, her combat knife ready, and listened to a conversation that confirmed her worst fears about the scope of institutional corruption. The Morocco operation is blown, Harrison was saying through the secure video link. Phoenix and Kozlov have destroyed our operational capacity and compromised our intelligence networks. We need to implement contingency protocols immediately. Agreed. General Vance replied from her position at the head of a conference table surrounded by military contractors and Defense Department officials. We'll activate the Syria option. If we can't deploy chemical weapons in Morocco, we'll use them against refugee camps near Damascus. The casualty numbers won't be as high, but the strategic impact will be sufficient to justify our next round of contract negotiations. Elena felt her blood turn to ice water. They were discussing the murder of hundreds of thousands of innocent refugees, as if it were a minor operational adjustment. A way to salvage profit margins from a failed business venture. Syrian deployment in 12 hours, Harrison confirmed. I'll provide updated intelligence packages and ensure that CIA oversight is appropriately limited. The president doesn't need to know the details until after the operation is complete. Elena moved into the conference room like death incarnate. Her knife finding General Vance's throat before anyone in the room could react. On the video screen, she could see Director Harrison's face go white with shock as he recognized his former operative. "Hello, Director," Elena said quietly, her blade pressing against Vance's carotid artery hard enough to draw blood. "Let's discuss your retirement options." What followed was 20 minutes of the most satisfying interrogation of Elena's professional career. With Vance's life hanging by a thread and the video conference recording everything for posterity, Harrison and his co-conspirators revealed the full scope of their corruption arms sales worth billions, assassination contracts targeting foreign leaders, the systematic betrayal of American intelligence, operations for private profit. Elena learned that the Morocco operation had been just one small piece of a global network that touched every major conflict zone in the world. Meridian Solutions and their government partners had been playing all sides against each other, selling weapons to terrorists and governments alike, then profiting from the cleanup operations that followed. When she was satisfied that she had extracted every useful detail, Elena ended the video conference with a simple message. "You have 24 hours to turn yourselves into congressional oversight committees. After that, I start releasing the evidence publicly, one name at a time." General Vance died with Elena's knife through her heart, her blood spreading across corporate financial reports that detailed the sale of human suffering for profit margins. Elena felt no remorse for the killing, only the grim satisfaction of eliminating someone who had chosen to participate in genocide for money. Kozlov was waiting for her in the compound's parking area, their extraction vehicle running and ready. Behind them, explosions were lighting up the night sky as the storage facility burned, taking with it enough chemical weapons to poison half of Africa. "How do you feel?" Kozlov asked as they drove away from the burning compound. Elena considered the question seriously. The operation had been a complete success. They had prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed millions, exposed a corruption network that reached the highest levels of government, and eliminated key personnel responsible for enabling genocide for profit operations around the world. But more than that, Elena felt a sense of completion that had been missing from her life since Sarah's death in Prague. For 3 years, she had been carrying the weight of failure and guilt, wondering if she could have done something different, something better. Now she understood that Sarah's death hadn't been caused by Elena's operational mistakes. It had been the inevitable result of systemic corruption that treated human lives as expendable assets. "I feel like Elena Martinez would be proud," she said finally. "Like Rosa and Miguel and Carmen didn't survive for nothing." This gripping espionage thriller follows Elena, a government operative who spent 3 years undercover as Elena Martinez, a gentle coffee shop worker, while pursuing the elusive agent Viktor Kozlov. Her deep cover mission led her to form genuine bonds with co-workers like Rosa, Miguel, and Carmen, relationships that became unexpectedly real despite being built on lies. The story reaches its climax during a dangerous operation in Morocco, where Elena and Kozlov uncover a massive conspiracy involving Director Harrison, General Vance, and the shadowy Meridian Solutions defense contractor. Their investigation reveals widespread corruption within American intelligence agencies, with high-ranking officials committing treason for profit. Rather than remaining enemies, Elena and Kozlov forge an unlikely partnership based on shared disillusionment with their respective governments. Together, they expose the conspiracy, leading to congressional investigations, criminal charges, and the downfall of numerous corrupt officials. Director Harrison dies under suspicious circumstances. while other conspirators face justice or disappear into witness protection. Elena's transformation from Phoenix, a by-the-book operative who believed in institutional authority, to an independent contractor operating outside legal boundaries, reflects the story's central theme. Sometimes protecting innocence requires abandoning moral certainty for pragmatic action. The narrative's emotional core emerges through Rosa's letter, which validates that Elena Martinez's love for her colleagues was genuine despite her false identity. Elena finds redemption by writing letters to Sofia, whose identity she borrowed, and Sarah Chun's parents, a fallen colleague, explaining the truth behind their sacrifices. The story concludes with Elena at peace in her Mediterranean apartment, having learned to navigate the gray areas between justice and law. She and Kozlov now take contracts targeting human traffickers and war criminals missions official agencies can't handle due to legal constraints. This tale explores themes of identity, loyalty, and moral compromise in a world where protecting the innocent sometimes requires becoming something they could never understand. Ready for more thrilling espionage stories? Subscribe now to never miss our latest tales of international intrigue, moral complexity, and the shadowy world where heroes operate beyond the law.